400 people murdered, one by one, over 3,500 wounded, almost 200 taken hostage. The elderly, men, women, children, babes in arms, murdered, mutilated, burned alive. We should call it by its name. It was a pogrom. Mr. Speaker, the families of some of the missing are in the public gallery today. We call for the immediate release of all hostages. And I say to them, we stand with you, we stand with Israel. The murdered and the missing come from over 30 countries, including the United Kingdom. The terrible nature of these attacks means it is proving difficult to identify many of the deceased. But with a heavy heart, I can inform the House that at least 6 British citizens were killed. A further 10 are missing, some of whom are feared to be among the dead. We are working with Israel to establish the facts as quickly as possible, and we are supporting the families who are suffering unimaginable pain. We are also helping British citizens who want to leave Israel. We've organised 8 flights so far, bringing out over 500 people, with more flights leaving today. We're working with neighbouring countries on land evacuations for our citizens in Gaza and the West Bank. I've spoken specifically to President Sisi about supporting civilians to leave Gaza by the Rafah border crossing, which at present remains closed. And we have a border force team in Egypt working with our embassy to help citizens when they are able to cross. I will come back to the grave humanitarian situation in Gaza in a moment. But first, Mr. Speaker, I want to address the British Jewish community directly. As I said at Finchley United Synagogue last week and at the Jewish school I visited this morning, we stand with you now and always. Yeah. This atrocity was an existential strike at the very idea of Israel as a safe homeland for the Jewish people. I understand why it has shaken you to your core, and I am sickened that anti-Semitic incidents have increased since the attack. We are doing everything that we can to protect you. We are providing an additional £3 million for the Community Security Trust to protect schools, synagogues, and other Jewish community buildings. And we are working with the police to ensure that hate crime and the glorification of terror is met with the full force of the law. I know the whole House will support this and join me in saying unequivocally, we stand with the Jewish community. Mr. Speaker, I also recognise that this is a moment of great anguish for British Muslim communities, who are also appalled by Hamas's actions but fearful of the response. We must listen to these concerns with the same attentiveness. Hamas is using innocent Palestinian people as human shields, with the tragic loss of more than 2,600 Palestinian lives, including many children. We mourn the loss of every innocent life, civilians of every faith, every nationality who have been killed. And so, let's say it plainly, we stand with British Muslim communities too. Mr. Speaker, Israel was founded not just as a homeland for the Jewish people, but as a guarantor of their security, to ensure that what happened to the Jewish people in the Holocaust could never happen again. Through its strength and resilience, Israel gradually achieved some of that longed-for security, despite the strategic threats on their borders, including Hezbollah in the north, with Iran at their back. They normalized relations with the UAE and Bahrain through the Abraham Accords, and moved towards normalizing ties with Saudi Arabia, steps that not long ago were thought unthinkable. One reason why this attack is so shocking is that it is a fundamental challenge to any idea of coexistence, which is an essential precursor to peace and stability in the region. Mr. Speaker, the question is, how should we respond? I believe we must support absolutely Israel's right to defend itself. To go after Hamas, take back the hostages, deter further incursions, and strengthen its security for the long term. This must be done in line with international humanitarian law, but also recognising that they face a vicious enemy that embeds itself behind civilians. As a friend, we will continue to call on Israel to take every possible precaution to avoid harming civilians. I repeat President Biden's words: as democracies, we are stronger and more secure when we act according to the rule of law. Humanity, law, decency, respect for human life. That's what sets us apart from the mindless violence of the terrorist. Mr. Speaker, there are three specific areas where the United Kingdom is helping to shape events. First, we are working to prevent escalation and further threats against Israel. On Friday, RAF surveillance aircraft began patrols to track threats to regional security. I have deployed a Royal Navy task group to the Eastern Mediterranean, including RFA Lyme Bay and RFA Argus, 3 Merlin helicopters and a company of Royal Marines, ready both to interdict arms and support the humanitarian response. We are bolstering our forces in Cyprus and across the region, and let me be clear, we are not engaging in fighting or an offensive in Gaza, but we are increasing our presence to prevent broader regional instability at this dangerous moment. Second, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud that we are a long-standing and significant provider of humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people. And I can announce today that we are increasing our aid by a third with an additional £10 million of support. An acute humanitarian crisis is unfolding to which we must respond. We must support the Palestinian people because they are victims of Hamas too. Like our allies, we believe that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people or their legitimate aspirations to live with equal measures of security, freedom, justice, opportunity, and dignity. Hamas simply does not stand for the future that the Palestinians want, and they seek to put the Palestinian people in harm's way. So we must ensure humanitarian support urgently reaches civilians in Gaza. This requires Egypt and Israel to allow in the aid that is so badly needed. We also need to keep the situation in the West Bank in the forefront of our minds at this moment of heightened sensitivity. Earlier today, I spoke to Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, to express our support for his efforts to provide stability. And third, we will use all the tools of British diplomacy to sustain the prospects of peace and stability in the region. Ultimately, that requires security for Israelis and Palestinians and a two-state solution. So we are increasing our regional engagement. I have spoken with Prime Minister Netanyahu twice in the last week, along with the United States, France, Germany, Italy, and others. My right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, was the first to visit Israel after the attacks. I met with His Majesty, the King of Jordan, yesterday, a long-time voice of reason and moderation. And I have spoken today with the leaders of Turkey and previously Egypt, and will speak to others in the coming days. Our partners in the region have asked us to play a role in preventing further escalation. That is what we will do. However hard it is, we need to ask the tough questions about how we can revive the long-term prospects for a two-state solution, for normalization and regional stability, not least because that is precisely what Hamas has been trying to kill. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, unequivocally backing Israel's right to defend itself, stepping forward with humanitarian support, working to protect civilians from harm, and straining every sinew to keep the flame of peace and stability alive. That is our objective. It is the right approach for the region. It is the right approach for Britain, and I commend this statement to the House.
Yeah. We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement and for the updates the government has provided to the Labour front bench over the past few days. Mr. Speaker, last Saturday, Israel was the victim of terrorism on an unimaginable scale. The senseless murder of men, women, children, even babies. The horrors of hostage-taking. Music festivals turned to killing fields. innocent Jews slaughtered within their own kibbutz, an attack with no cause other than bloodshed. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that over the last few days, every member of this House has seen images from this crisis that will never be unseen. Tiny bodies wrapped in bundles in Israel and now in Gaza. Mothers and fathers grieving, Israeli, Palestinian, Muslim, Jew. The innocent dead. As in any time of grave crisis, it is crucial that this House speaks with one voice in condemnation of terror, in support for Israel in its time of agony, and for the dignity of all human life. Because, Mr. Speaker, Hamas do not wish to see peace in the Middle East. They just want to see Israel wiped off the map. But Hamas are not the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian people are not Hamas. So Labour stands with Israel. Britain stands with Israel. The attack is ongoing. Terrorists are at large. Hostages are still being held, some of them British citizens. Israel has the right to bring her people home, to defend herself, to keep its people safe. And whilst Hamas has the capability to carry out attacks on Israeli territory, there can be no safety. As Secretary of State Blinken said last week, we democracies distinguish ourselves from terrorists by striving for a different standard, even when it is difficult. He is right. And as the Prime Minister has said, there is an acute humanitarian crisis unfolding. Israel's defence must be conducted in accordance with international law. Civilians must not be targeted. Innocent lives must be protected. There must be humanitarian corridors. There must be humanitarian access, including food, water, electricity and medicines, so that hospitals can keep people alive and so that innocent people do not needlessly die. And there must be proper protection for all those who work selflessly, so aid can be delivered to victims. Mr. Speaker, there can be no doubt the responsibility for this crisis lies with Hamas. They have no interest in Palestinian rights, no interest in the security of the people of Gaza. They unleash terror, then hide among them women and children used as human shields, hostages held who should be released. They are destroyers of lives, of hope, of peace. And we cannot give them what they want. We must keep striving for a two-state solution, a Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel. We cannot give up on that hope, cannot let Hamas brutality be a catalyst for conflict in the wider region. Engagement between Israel and Arab nations must be strengthened, not abandoned. International cooperation, the rule of law, a political road to peace. Hamas want us to abandon all three. And in defiance, we must be resolute on all of them. And Mr. Speaker, these attacks are having a huge impact on communities across the United Kingdom. Many in this House will have heard devastating stories from people who have lost friends and family, people deeply worried about the future of those they know in Israel or Palestine, including the First Minister of Scotland, who I spoke to at the weekend. We stand with all of them, stand against the worrying rise in Islamophobia, stand against the anti-Semitic abuse, threats and assaults we've seen on British streets. Because, Mr. Speaker, we must never underestimate the burden of history the Jewish people carry with them. I do not want Britain to be a place where Jewish schools are closed, Jewish children stay at home out of fear, and Jewish families feel compelled to hide their identity. And I do not want Britain to be a place where British Muslims feel that they have to apologise for the actions of people who do not act in their name. We cannot allow community cohesion in our country to be destroyed. We all bear a responsibility to do all we can to stamp out hate, and we fully support police action to provide extra assistance for our communities. Mr. Speaker, the events of the past week have seen horrors beyond our imagination. So let's send a strong message. Westminster is united. Britain is united with Israel against terror, for international law and the protection of innocent lives. There are difficult days ahead, but our values cannot be compromised. Terror cannot win. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his remarks. And let me just say at the outset, this is an unprecedented and extraordinarily difficult situation and is likely to remain difficult for all of us in the days and weeks ahead. But we must always have in the forefront of our mind that responsibility for this crisis is Hamas and Hamas alone. It was a barbaric act of terrorism that has inflicted untold suffering and misery on so many people, and we have felt that acutely here at home. And we have seen the impact on our streets over the past week, and it has sickened all of us. And we stand united in saying that anti-Semitism has no place in our society. Mr. Speaker, let me be unequivocal that those who incite racial or religious hatred on our streets, that inflict violence, that cause untold suffering to people, will be met with the full force of the law. I know the whole House will join me in making sure that that happens, that the police have all the tools, resources and powers they need to bring that about. And let me also just say, in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable gentleman opposite is absolutely right. This House stands united in saying that we condemn unequivocally this terrorist attack by Hamas, stands united in saying that we will be steadfast in our support for Israel, steadfast in our support for the Jewish people, not just today, not just tomorrow, but always.
From the House of Peterbottom.
The House will be grateful both to the Prime Minister...
OK, so you were watching or listening there to Rishi Sunak, then Keir Starmer, then Rishi Sunak again, both addressing the House on the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'll run you through initially what Rishi Sunak had to say. He was clear, unequivocal at the top there, saying that the UK calls for the immediate release of all hostages. He confirmed that at least 6 Brits have been killed by Hamas and that there are around 10 others missing, believed to be held hostage. He said that we are not engaging in the fighting in Gaza, but we are bolstering our presence in that area to prevent a broader regional instability, and that presence includes things like providing surveillance, providing a Royal Navy task force, bolstering the amount of people and troops in Cyprus, of course, where we have a large military base there, and increasing the presence there to prevent that broader regional instability. So that was what Rishi Sunak had to say. He also said that those who incite violence and hatred on our streets will feel the full force of the law. For what it was worth, Keir Starmer coming out straight away saying that Hamas are a designated terrorist organisation, emphasising the kind of depravity that took place there. A stark contrast, one may well read into that with his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, by the way.